11 o'clock, welcome in. It's the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Thanks again to our guy, Jeremy Smith from Garnet Trust, for hanging out with us during the Garnet Trust Hour last hour there. Today was another day of media availability for spring practice as we got a little over a week left before wrapping things up with the spring game coming up next Saturday. Wes, you were out there taking things in. Do we have all the answers to the questions that we have for the spring?
We have all the answers. I'm going to just make them up.
You got the whole depth chart?
Yes, no depth chart drill today. Sorry, guys. I can go home now.
I didn't
right?
figure there would be.
We did get a little bit of kind of a run game drill that was basically O-line, tight ends, running backs, of course, the quarterback to hand the ball off versus D-line, linebackers, safety. So again, there is no depth chart, guys. And don't you dare think there is. But we got a glimpse at what could be the start of a depth chart at certain positions.
Spill it.
Well, they have to read Gamecock Central.
Yes, that's a good.
I'll say this: the first team O line, or the O line. Let's be accurate. The O line in this drill was pretty much what we've seen so far, except Tree Babalade was at left tackle this time. So Tree at left tackle, Kamar Bell playing some guard. Of course, Troy Ball playing some guard, Rashawn Lee at center, and then Kason Henry, who really, I would say I think every time we've been out there, for the most part, that we've seen, he has been the guy with that first team right tackle. So that's kind of, I don't recall seeing Ja'Kai more. So Ja'Kai has kind of been working in there at left tackle some as well. And that was the group that was out there.
Well, if Kason Henry can avoid getting hurt in the actual games, because, he's a great right tackle as far as practice goes, and being inserted in the starting lineup, just couldn't stay healthy last year.
Yeah, he's had some misfortune as far as the injury bug goes, but they've been high on him for a while. Ever since they landed him, and then you kind of heard some buzz about him, and it's easy to kind of forget about him, I think, in terms of the expectations for that position, but I think he's holding it down. I like his leadership ability too. That's one thing I've heard. He's a talker. He is a kind of fiery guy. He's someone that is always kind of encouraging his teammates and discouraging his defensive line opponents,
right.
from what I hear. So I like that. You got to have some different personalities everywhere, and he plays with that edge, I think, is what you would say about Kason Henry, and I respect that.
I'm very intrigued by Kamar Bell. I feel like he's kind of this year's version of a Nick Gargiulo, where, remember Gargiulo, like South Carolina signs him, and everybody's like, oh, interesting, dude from Yale. He's got long hair and a mustache and all those things. And that was kind of, that might be a good get, but not a lot of fanfare about it. And he comes in, and he's a starter and helps stabilize that center position, and generally, played through an injury, had a good year. Kamar Bell, late add to the transfer class, flew very much under the radar. It was just kind of like, hey, Kamar Bell's coming. Not this big drawn-out portal recruitment where he's taking all these visits. This is a guy who's a 6-year player. He was recruited to an SEC school in Auburn out of high school, and he's played a lot of football for FAU as a starter. And, kind of as you look to stabilize a guard spot, he certainly looks to be an option, and he looks like he's been a pretty big factor so far in that race.
Yeah, he has. And so Marky Anderson was with the twos today. So he's in there. He's working. I think with a lot of these younger guys, it's just going to be about how quickly do they come along. We've talked about that with Josiah Thompson. Of course, with Marquis missing an entire year, kind of trying to get back to 100% health. And there's a lot of factors that kind of go into that. And so I think there's been a lot of hand-wringing about the O-line on the internet. Well, I do think we got to remember they are still kind of working through the pieces of who the first 5 are going to be and where they're going to play. As I've talked about before, Tree, I believe, has played some guard, but it was back at left tackle today. How quickly can Josiah Thompson come along? How far does a Tree come along after playing a lot last year? How far does a Troy Ball come along after playing last year? And then, of course, can a Marky Anderson kind of get back to where he was and start building from there?
I go back to when Shane talked to the media the other day, and he was posed the question that it had been reported that the offensive line was struggling. He said that wasn't necessarily the case. It was just more the defense being ahead of the offense, which isn't surprising. That's typically how it goes, early on in spring practice. But you brought up a good point there that, the offensive line, and we talked about this so much last year when you're just having a different starting five every single week because of injuries and everything like that. You got to have some time to get some chemistry going with these guys. And especially when you brought in as many guys in the transfer portal and you got like Casey Henry that was hurt, that's now kind of back in the fold. Like, you just got to get the same five guys working together, which is going to take a lot of time. And it's not going to be done by the end of spring by any means. But, it's one of those things that goes over the course of the summer and fall camp as well to hopefully have that nailed down when the season starts and can stay consistent week in and week out where you have good play up front because you're not rotating guys in and out each week.
Yeah, and I was glad to hear Shane Beamer say that because that's something we've been saying is that the defense is ahead of the offense right now, and that typically, especially at the beginning of spring, that is almost always the case. Now, of course, maybe there are some scenarios where if you brought back your entire receiving core and brought back your quarterback and you were playing up against a young defense in practice, there could be some scenarios where maybe that wasn't the case. But you look at South Carolina this year, breaking in a new quarterback, entire new running back core, O-line, like we said, work in progress. Guys are coming back from injury. You're kind of trying to figure out who your best five are. An entire new receiving core, tight end, you bring back Josh Simon, but you're breaking in some other guys there as well. So I don't think this should be a shock that one is ahead of the other. Typically, you are at times kind of struggling to figure out, all right, is this because the D is playing well? Is this because the O is struggling? But offense is so much about timing. And that's one thing that's been pointed out to me is when the timing is a little bit off, and I'm not saying this is specifically what it is, but when you're talking about a lot of new guys all trying to kind of gel together offensively, it does take time. Now, the other side, on defense, you're talking about returning a bunch of guys, adding some transfers who, by all indications, have sort of just assimilated well to what South Carolina is already doing on defense. It's a little bit easier as a senior linebacker to insert in because if you get knocked out of a gap, that's not necessarily going to be taken advantage of by the offense. Whereas we talked about it yesterday, if an offensive guard just whiffs on a block, the entire play can be blown up because one guy out of the 11 got beat. So it is, something that is going to be a process, I think, for South Carolina. And if I would say this, you want to start to see the offense come along a little bit in this final week. I would agree with that. At the same time, if we were hearing that the offense was just kicking the defense's butt for 10 practices, I think that would be a terrible sign for this defense.
Very bad sign, especially because of, as you pointed out, the experience on defense and the fact that, go back to our conversation earlier this year, Wes, with Shane Beamer. I mean, I think he's 100% right, but he was up front with it of, man, we were not good enough. We went 5-7. We were not good enough on offense or defense or special teams. They all share in the blame. He gave specific examples of each. Could it be, and I don't know the answer yet. We won't know until the team lines up at a minimum against Old Dominion, and even that, no offense to Old Dominion, is that's not going to be the best test, the most accurate measuring stick, right? But could it be that this defense has kind of built on how they played in November, which was pretty good? They played well against Kentucky and against Clemson. They did not play well at all in October, but they played better in November. They brought back a lot of pieces. They've added some pieces. Could the defense be ready to take a step forward? If so, that's a positive. But look at who they've got up front in the not only the talent, in some cases, but depth and experience. I mean, you've got DeAndre Jules and Tonka, two graduate guys. You've got Nick Barrett and Boogie Huntley. They're seniors. TJ Sanders and Monkel Goodwine are redshirt juniors. Then you look at linebacker. You've got guys like Debo Williams and the two transfers who played a lot of football, and Bam Martin Scott, who's a multi-year college player. You've got a lot of experience there, and so I totally agree. You would be, I think, more concerned if you were hearing, the offense is going up and down the field. That'd be exciting, right, for that side. But then defensively, you'd be going, man, this is not a good sign.
Couple more observations you guys had of practice. Speaking of the defense, a couple guys not participating today, Nicky Minwari and David Spalding. It looks like Tonk Hemingway was also in a blue medical jersey as well.
Yeah, blue non-contact. And so Tonka was out there participating. The other two guys were not. Both were banged up, Beamer said on Tuesday, so no surprise on that. I think pretty sure Nick did not scrimmage on Saturday either. So they're just being careful with him. But those guys were walking around. It wasn't like they were like if you just saw them, you wouldn't have known they were injured. Like nobody was hobbling, nobody had a cast on, nobody was in a boot or anything like that. So I think I know with injuries people kind of go into conspiracy mode, but both those guys should be completely fine in no time, I would think. Combining what Beamer said and with what I saw today.
There is a significant list of guys, though, that are nicked up right now that likely won't be playing in the spring game next weekend, though.
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll see. I think that depends on how they sort of progress as far as their injuries go in the next, I guess, week or so. You'd want to have that. This time next week, I think you want to know who can play and who can't. And I don't think you have any game time decisions for the spring game. Like if a guy is dinged up, you probably don't play him. And yeah, Beamer said on Tuesday, what he used the word handful. I think he said, I don't want to say a handful.
But a handful. We'll probably miss. So we'll see which guys those are. But, he mentioned Brady Hunt. Brady Hunt was out there today. So everybody at this point, guys, you're gonna have bumps and bruises. It's just a matter of how bad they are. Heard from a couple players yesterday. Speaking to the media, we'll dive into what they had to say coming up as the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs rolls on your Thursday here on the game.
Yeah, I think that the last 4 games last year definitely transferred over to now, and it's definitely giving me a boost of confidence. Like, cause now, like, I feel like the world know, like, yeah, I'm a ball player now. So, yeah, I just keep on carrying on that same over. But
Welcome back in Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head, Wes Mitchell, Chris Clark, along with you on this Thursday. Appreciate everybody checking us out on the Game TV, sponsored by Shepherd's Glass, as well as on the 1075 The Game app. That was the voice of Bam Martin Scott talking to the media yesterday. And we've talked so much about him and his performance at the end of last season in that month of November, where they started to do a little bit more 3-3-5 stuff, which brought him onto the field a lot more, and he was able to pop and put in some really good performances over those last couple games. I was reading over the last time that you guys were out at practice, and he was in that group of ones, or what we perceive to be the ones, with that linebacking core when 3 of them were on the field, and the hope and expectation that he's going to have he's going to have a good season as a whole, riding that momentum from a year ago going into 2024.
Yeah, I think he's one of those guys that athletically and just skill set wise and just overall ability, you were always kind of wondering when he might be able to break out. And you look at him, the kind of sideline to sideline speed, long arms, is a good pass rusher as well. And I think in that 3-3-5, they found a perfect, I would say, the requirements for that position are a perfect fit for his skill set. And so I think not really a surprise that he emerged, but maybe a surprise to the extent in which he emerged. I mean, watching him play against Clemson last year, I mean, he was all over the field making plays. And so I think for South Carolina, the big question for me, and specifically for Bam, is can he take that and bring it forward to where he can also make that type of impact in the 4-2-5 as well. I think when they're in their 3-3-5 set, which, again, we've talked about it, sometimes they'll be in that, sometimes they won't. They're going to kind of commingle, I believe is a big Will Muschamp, where they're going to kind of commingle the two defenses and go back and forth between them. He's a clear starter. He's a clear 1 in the 3-3-5. As of right now, he's been a 1 in the 4-2-5 as well, which was not the case for South Carolina last year. The question is, can he also excel with what is asked kind of that middle linebacker spot in the 4-2-5? And I think if you can kind of continue to unlock his potential, it really gives you a pretty athletic linebacking core. And if it's not him, then I think you could see a Demetrius Knight kind of push into that to where it would be, Bam's still on the field for 3-3-5, but then Demetrius Knight is on the field for 3-3-5 and the 4-2-5 at that kind of Mike spot.
Yeah, it really seems like this is an on paper thing, right? But I think it matches some with what we have seen in the small parts that we've seen and what we've been hearing out of spring ball. And that is, this is probably, I can't think of a time recently where they'll have had this much depth potentially at linebacker. You think about like early in Shane Beamer's tenure, you'd have an injury at linebacker. They really would play 3 guys.
They were just praying for them to stay healthy.
And then one gets hurt, and you're like, well, those 2 were playing the entire game, and they can't get hurt, and unfortunately they didn't, right? But even last year, they played 4 guys. You could say 5 when Jaron Willis started playing more in that 3-3-5, and obviously Bam started playing more at the end of the year. But really it was, you look, Debo Williams played 779 snaps. Stone Blanton played 642. Then there's a pretty big drop-off. Next guy up at linebacker, Bam Martin Scott with 275. And really, as you said, Wes, he didn't end up playing a bigger role until end of year. This year, if it works out this way, I don't know if it will, they'll have the ability to not split snaps, but they will feel good about the other options. They'll feel good about Kamara, Demetrius Knight, playing Willis situationally. Heck, they may feel good about putting J.R. Johnson or Wendell Gregory in there And now you start seeing a semblance of some actual depth, and that can trickle down to your special teams as well.
Well, and it's not only depth, it's veteran depth at that. I mean, you have 4 guys that are listed as seniors as of right now with Debo Williams, Ben Martin Scott, Demetrius Knight, and Bengali Kamara coming in the transfer portal. So that alone is just a ton of snaps of football being played, whether it be here at South Carolina or other places. We'll see if Mo Kaba can come along with recovering from his knee injury once again. Jerron Willis, I think it's a sophomore, still listed as that. Then you have 2 guys coming in as freshmen. So not only do you have that depth, you have a lot of senior experience in this linebacker core for whatever scheme you're going to end up using more often than not, whether it be the 4-2-5 or the 3-3-5.
Yeah, no, if I'm J.R. Johnson or I'm Wendell Gregory, I'm sitting there, I'm looking up, I'm like, man, there's seniors everywhere. It's going to be tough to break into this rotation. But with a little bit of sort of foresight ahead, I'm like, this thing opens up a ton next season. So for those 2 guys, I think you could get hopefully valuable reps this year when you can get them, and then that you want for that to catapult you into next year when it really opens up. And that's what South Carolina wants. Like they don't want to have to go portal. Let's go get 2 seniors and only have them for 1 year. Now, it's going to work out because they hit on both of these guys. Like, the early returns are incredibly positive on both of them. But that's not what they want to do. They would rather land the freshmen and the freshmen stick around and develop within this defense and then play within this scheme for a number of years, which really is kind of what you have with Debo. And then Bam Martin Scott to an extent. I mean, he was a JUCO guy, but he's now been here several years. So I think that's what they want. They'll fill in the blanks with transfers when they have to, and they were kind of forced to because Stone and Pup left. But I think actually they've kind of upgraded their athleticism there, to be frank.
Speaking of that athleticism, one of those guys they bring in is Demetrius Knight. Cut number 10 here, Dave. Here's Demetrius Knight yesterday talking about the speed of not only him but Bam Martin Scott.
I have this spring, or I guess winter workouts when we were I guess I was clocked at a 21.8. So, but Bam got me with the 22, a little bit faster than me. But we're 245 pounds and can still run 21.8, 21.9. You're pretty fast. But I was that's as fast as I've been. I'm still scratching at the door for that 22, but I'll hit that one day.
Personally, I think the fact that he's about 20 pounds heavier than Bam Martin Scott and still runs almost the same speed, I think we might give the nod to Demetrius Knight on that one, to be honest with you.
I knew Knight was, I mean, he's a freak of nature athletically. That was one thing South Carolina, I don't know where these numbers came from. South Carolina had those numbers as far as his evaluation. Like, hey, this guy is fast. And that was part of the reason they brought him in. And I think for Knight, former safety in high school, former quarterback in high school, and it did take a little bit of time in his career for him to sort of really truly develop into a linebacker, both in terms of what's expected at that position and the just getting that weight, adding that weight on. But man, that's, I don't want to say a shocking number from Bam, but that's impressive.
It's eye-opening, that's for sure.
Is Bam gonna be the next? This guy,
Xavier Legette?
I'm
Yes.
not saying that, but is he going to be the next NFL teams are going, wait, who's that 22?
I mean, probably so, man, because, I mean, he's like an off-the-bus guy, and then certainly when he puts the pads on, you're like, his arms are, almost at his ankles. I mean, he's just got these this long-limbed guy who's got, you go back to him in junior college, and you could tell kind of still raw, but like he could rush the passer, he could move, he could run sideline to sideline, and it's kind of just continued to develop. And I think he's a great example. Yeah, not the next. That's an extreme example of Xavier Legette, but kind of similar in that you can see a guy that has a great physical composition, and then he's got these tools like he can run, he's long, he's rangy. Not all those come in and set the world on fire in year one. Sometimes, you do have to develop players still in the year 2024. They still have to develop. And, I mean, the signs at the end of the year, it coincided with Bam started playing more in November. The team defensively started playing better in November as well.
Well, when you have two comparable guys on the defense running that fast, being able to be those sideline to sideline guys playing in a three linebacker type of set, it's like Bam Martin Scott with what he did at the end of last season. That's only going to benefit the entire defense as a whole.
Yeah, I think it's maybe overlooked a little bit, but actual competition with depth comes true competition, and you have to perform to play, and that I think goes a long way. I think this got a chance not to just be a team like, okay, the linebackers, there's 4, 5, 6 guys. I think it's 4, 5, 6 guys that you could maybe count on, depending on how far along does a Gregory come, how far along does J.R. Johnson come, but for those guys, you don't have to force them into action. If they're playing, it's because they're ready and you're trying to find snaps for them. It's not because you said, hey, we have to throw a freshman into the fire. So I think all these things are good overall for the health of that linebacker room.
We'll get to some stuff from Coach Beamer the other day that we can get a chance to touch on yesterday, as the transfer portal is going to be opening up very soon once spring practice is nearing its end coming up next week. We'll get into some of Beamer's thoughts on that and what he might be expecting out of this team as far as the transfer portal goes. That's all coming up. It's the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here in the game.
All right, guys, let me tell you about my friends at Classic Roofing. Head on over to classicroofingsc.com or just give them a call right now, 803-590-7870. They're probably riding around to a site right this moment, checking up, making sure everything's going well, and they want to come out and do a free estimate on your roof so they can make sure everything's going well with your roof, too. That's what they did for us. That's what they can do for you. With a wealth of experience spanning more than 20 years, their team of experts is well-equipped to handle all of your roofing requirements. That could be just a residential project at your house or a commercial undertaking, or really in between. They have got you covered. The mission is simple: provide you with top-notch roofing solutions that will not only protect your property, but also enhance its curb appeal. Again, that's 803-590-7870. That's our friends at Classic Roofing. For more information, head on over to classicroofingsc.com for information on their services.
Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head, West Mitchell, Chris Clark, along with you on this Thursday. I want to remind you once again, go online to 1075thegame.com and register for the Palmetto Citizens Federal Credit Union Grand Slam giveaway. $25 added to the pot each and every game until a Gamecocks hitter can blast a Grand Slam this season. Next game coming up tomorrow night is to take on Florida on the road in Gainesville. 6:30 first pitch, pregame coverage starting at 6:15 right here on the game. We didn't get a chance to get into this yesterday when discussing the stuff that Beamer had to say in his presser on Tuesday, but we're going to jump back in to this conversation as the transfer portal is going to be opening up next week. It'll actually open up before South Carolina concludes spring practice. Beamer did mention that as they do each and every year, they'll have meetings with all the players starting the following Monday after the spring game to kind of discuss where they stand and see who might end up going in the transfer portal and who's going to end up sticking around. But here is Coach Beamer talking on Tuesday about how they're going to assess the upcoming spring portal window.
Yeah, it's a challenge. It's a challenge. I mean, we still have spring practice going on. Our guys are finishing up exams right after the spring game. You've got your own roster to worry about. You're having individual meetings as well, and want everybody that's on our roster to come back and continue the work that they've put in since January. But you look at what's out there, and if there's a situation the guy fits what we want, what we're about, and can make our team better, that's my job as the head coach to bring in people that can help us after spring practice, like we did last season with JT Gear. Came in after spring practice and did some really good things for us last year, and will continue to. But it's tough as a coach because you truly don't know. You're going through spring ball right now, but you truly don't know who your team is going to be until the middle of May. And I say that like the portal closes on April 30th, but if there's somebody in the portal that we decide to bring in, then you're going to bring them in on a visit in May, and then finally, okay, you get to the first, second week of May, all right, this is the 2024 Gamecock football team, and that's a challenge as well. It's kind of a lot like a NFL team that's going through off-season program, OTAs, mini camps. They don't really know who's going to be on the New England Patriots until training camp's over type thing. And we're fortunate we don't have to wait right before the first game to know that. We wait till the middle of May, but that's a challenge as a coach, but part of it. And you're right, we're all learning and going through it the first time and trying to figure out the best way to maximize the situation for your particular team.
And it is a bit of a tricky situation because the portal does open up on Tuesday. So you're essentially going to have the portal open for an entire week before South Carolina does have these, I don't want to call them exit interviews, but assessments with these guys to see, where they stand. And guys are obviously going to elect to go into the portal. And, South Carolina can then go and fill those spots and other spots with guys they can find in the portal. You're just going to be a couple days behind what a lot of other programs that have either wrapped up their spring practice or, are already playing their spring games this weekend or whatever it may be. That can go ahead and kind of get a jump on things as opposed to SC.
Yeah, there's a couple different things to think about when it comes to this spring portal window, and one is Beamer hit on this part of it. Do you look around and say, okay, we now have a better sense now that spring is not over, but you've gone through about 2/3 of spring ball. Once this portal actually opens, and so you went into this spring with some notions about what you might need. And for South Carolina, you're not slamming the door on any other position, but the biggest one that you could point to was wide receiver, where you're going and saying, okay, if there's a couple guys with size that you can add from the portal, let's take a look at that. I don't think anything has really changed in that regard to where that need is absolutely not there anymore. I think the staff is very much going to be looking at it with that primary focus in mind. Hey, if there's a guy or two in the portal that fit the profile receiver, maybe we can go grab one. Let's see where that goes. But the other part of it is just hoping you avoid any portal surprises in terms of defections. And that's possible at South Carolina. That's possible everywhere. There's a lot of scuttle around the recruiting industry, NIL, transfer portal, about how this is going to be kind of a wild spring. There were some surprises in the last portal window. I wouldn't be surprised at all, and that seems, in fact, to be the expectation around the country, that there's going to be some surprising decisions in terms of portal entries this spring. If you're South Carolina, you just got to hope that you're, not one of those.
I think with the portal, as a fan, you kind of, and I'm not saying this because of any direct knowledge, I'm just saying this in general, you kind of have to expect the unexpected when it comes to the portal. Now, it is luckily a little bit smaller window. Like, it's going to hopefully be over soon. So you're not having to kind of wait weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. But at the same time, you have to prepare yourself. Now, for South Carolina, they're hopeful. Beamer said it. They're hopeful that they don't really lose anybody, as there's always a chance that after they have those interviews, coach with player, that there's a kid who says, man, I'm not playing as much as I want to. I don't project to play as much as I want to. I'm going to hit the portal. Of course, I've said for a while, I consider those completely different. Those are your kind of healthy transfers. Those are completely different than your, this guy projects to start and nobody is expecting him to leave, and then boom, he's like, Coach, I'm hitting the portal. And so I think for South Carolina, you obviously want to avoid those situations. And I can promise you, even though on the other side of it, even though South Carolina will still be going through spring practice, they have an entire recruiting staff that the second this portal window opens, they're already going to be seeing who's in there, evaluating. They're I promise you, already evaluating guys that they've heard might enter the portal. So information gathering, and there's also, guys, there's always the case, there's always a chance of a best available, which to me means, yeah, this isn't a position of need, but maybe there's a prior connection to a guy, maybe a guy's from your state, he hits the portal, and you say, man, we don't need this position, but he can help this football team. Mm-hmm. And those are the things that can also be unpredictable because you just don't know who's going to pop up in this thing these days.
Yeah, I mean, it could be I don't – this is the toughest position arguably out of the portal, but here's this left tackle. I mean, almost any program is going to look there. Here's this – we talked about this a lot lately, Wes. Like, you feel probably better about corner as we've continued to hear that, Vakari Swain and Judge Collier and Emory Floyd are coming on, but what if there's a big-time defensive back out there who's, like, versatile and you feel like you could – maybe you take a look there. But I still think receiver is the one that you tend to look for the most because you look at a few positions, defensive tackle, well, you've got a lot of experience there. You're not looking to add, okay, do we add another junior or senior, defensive lineman? Probably not. It doesn't make as much sense when you're thinking about managing your roster. A 6'2", 6'3" receiver who has proven experience, that, tends to, that makes a lot more sense. But I agree with your assessment of it, Wes. Expect the unexpected. Like, you really can't log on to Gamecock Central or log on to Twitter wherever you get your news, maybe a variety of places. You can't really log on and say, that guy hit the portal. Like, it's almost just, you're almost numb to it a little bit because it's happened. It's happened here, but it's happened across the board. There's so many examples. Oklahoma, Dylan Gabriel leaves Oklahoma, to get, it's like, what? But it happens at a lot of places. And so, again, going back, I've said this, I think, 3 or 4 times in about 5 minutes, but if you're South Carolina, you're just hoping that there's no unpleasant surprises on that front, but you can't be shocked if there are.
And we really didn't even get to dive into this. Not that this was somebody that's going to be factoring into the starting role necessarily, but they did already have one guy that said he was going to enter the transfer portal earlier on this week, in Jackson Hughes, who had transferred in from Charlotte a season ago. And again, that's not really a factor on who's going to be in your starting 5, but that's at least one potential opening that you now have as far as the scholarship goes for a guy that's going to be entering the portal.
Well, he wasn't on scholarship.
So, okay. Yeah. He wasn't on scholarship.
He was. So I think that speaks to part of the reason that he left.
Sure.
Is he came in, he wanted to take a shot, obviously, at playing Power 5, probably looked at the depth chart last year and said, hey, I might be able to earn a scholarship here. He dealt with injuries, great kid by all indications, but it doesn't appear that it was on the cards for him to play much for South Carolina this year. And if you're paying your own way, I mean, it makes all the sense in the world. He's a grad transfer guy, so he can, well, I guess you could transfer anyway these days, but still, anybody can transfer anywhere, it appears. But point being, he'll transfer down, I would think, to a place where he can go play and probably on scholarship.
We'll come back and wrap up today's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Up next, Kentucky still doesn't have a new head basketball coach, and one name got crossed off the list earlier on this morning. We'll hit that coming up. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs on the game.
You know what? I'm jacked about another opportunity. I'm like, let's go. Now, I met with the team. There is no team. So now Hunter's really extremely confident, but we got to get a roster together. And some of it is a little bit of everything, but we will. It may take a little longer because there are kids that put their name in the NBA draft that are going to go through.
Welcome back in. It's the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler West Mitchell, Chris Clark along with you for a few more minutes. John Calipari being introduced as the Arkansas head coach yesterday, saying there's really not a team to address at this point in time. So he's got some work to do before next basketball season rolls around. They've got more NIL money than they know what to do with. They'll be fine, but it is kind of funny to say, I addressed the team. There was no team.
First of all, can we get that in our show open as well? I think that's an awesome clip. I laughed. I felt like he didn't get that was at the actual press conference.
Yeah.
Maybe the mics weren't picking it up. I felt like he didn't get the in-room laughter maybe that he expected out of that.
Yeah, I thought the joke missed.
I thought it was hilarious. He actually addressed the Arkansas crowd, the fans, at a later point, and he adjusted how he said it.
Yeah.
And they laughed heartily.
Did you? So was it a volleyball game or something like that he was addressing them at? It was at their
I don't know, but
arena.
I know my man avoided doing the call.
He did avoid doing the call. And the funny part was after he spoke, they showed one of the Tyson family donors, and that guy got a standing ovation from this crowd, not John Calipari.
Well, John Calipari is there
because of him.
Because of him. And so this whole thing is fascinating. First of all, it's weird to see Cal in Arkansas stuff. It's just weird. My brain doesn't quite process it. Second of all, I'm reporting, assuming it's true, from Kentucky saying, oh, man, we're going to up our NIL support and we're going to get a practice facility. I'm like, aren't those the things that Calipari was begging for the last few years?
Well, it goes back to his comments about saying, hey, we're a basketball school. You should invest in basketball, not football.
There clearly was a weird kind of relationship at the end between Mitch Barnhart, their AD, and Calipari. Now, the other part is that apparently, by all the reporting today, Scott Drew is staying at Baylor.
I was going to ask y'all, I mean, it's hard to say. It's hard to be like, put yourself in the shoes of a head basketball coach. We don't really have that. I try to think of it in terms of family and, being happy with what you do generally. But it's hard to get on that level. But you start looking at this Kentucky job and the amount of people that have said no thanks, or supposedly, a lot of people are putting Dan Hurley into the he said no category. I mean, he kind of did, but he maybe not for sure.
He did not directly say, I am not taking the Kentucky job or I'm staying at Kentucky.
I won't be the next Kentucky.
But he laughed when asked the question the other day.
Yeah,
so
it
take that for what you will.
It seems like a no.
Yeah, because wouldn't we be hearing his name more as a possibility? Because he's
he would have been the top of the list.
Clear number one, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Nate Oates has put out a comment. He's not leaving Alabama. And now Scott Drew is staying at Baylor. And I mean, those were kind of three of your top options right there.
Billy Donovan has also not said no.
Well, he said they haven't even reached out to him.
Well,
choose to believe that if you want to.
Yeah, the coaches say that all the time. I haven't heard anything. Well, your agent is on the phone right now with the other school. So, I'm sure there was some kind of outreach to Billy Donovan. If I'm him, I'm not itching to go back to college. But that is the interesting thing, though. This is a great job at Kentucky.
It is.
But it seems like some coaches are like, I'd rather. I got a good thing going.
You understand the level of expectation, what's going to be expected out of you when you get there, that if you're not in a Final Four within your first 3 seasons, they're going to be ready to run you out of town.
And from what I'm just leaning on the Twitter folks, the reporters out there. They said that Drew and his family are, from a personality standpoint, a little bit reserved. Mm-hmm. And so you're in a good situation at Baylor. I saw Matt Jones. I guess this is true. He said he saw a screenshot of a conversation or something. Apparently, when that picture came out a couple of days ago of Drew sitting at a restaurant, or maybe this was yesterday, that a Kentucky fan figured out which restaurant it was and called the restaurant and said, told the waitress to tell Scott Drew, we want you in Lexington.
Yeah.
If I'm shy and not really, I'm more about like, I'm going to put my head down and go to work type of person. I'm like, wait, I can't even go to lunch, and these fools are calling the restaurant.
These people are nuts.
Yeah. Although, hey, according to KSR, nobody's ever turned down Kentucky basketball for anything. So,
Speaking of KSR, did you see that Tyson sent him a bunch of Dino Nuggies?
yes.
Yeah. I mean, I saw that. I even put it on Twitter. Like, anybody listening, we will accept your care package at the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour. Even if you're trolling us.
Yeah.
We'll take your free stuff.
Please.
There's no problem at all. But I wondered, in seriousness, like, where are they going to go next? You know, I mean, do you try to double back to Billy D and do you try to double back to Dan Hurley?
A lot of conversation around Bruce Pearl maybe being the next guy on the list, and obviously he's been at Tennessee, he's been at Auburn, like he understands the SEC, and I would say the Auburn fan base is, holds basketball to a pretty high standard, not to the standard that Kentucky does, obviously, but I feel like Bruce Pearl, with his personality, could handle what would be thrown at him in Lexington.
Why leave at this point, though?
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't do it if I were him unless they just back up the Brinks truck and say, hey, here's $15 million to come coach us. That's pretty enticing. But other than that, yeah, I'd stay put where I'm at.
At what point, though, are you so well off that some additional money doesn't even factor?
Well, and that's another thing that goes into the Scott Drew thing, because he would obviously make more if he were to go and take the Kentucky job. But, I mean, this is a guy that's been at Baylor for 20 years. He's got roots set down in there. Like, a couple $1 million really isn't probably going to sway somebody like him too much.
Yeah, I agree. You gotta have a good fit with where you're at. And so I don't know if that's a fit. The thing for this, from a Kentucky standpoint, is it very publicly seemed to have focused in on Drew. Like, it's one thing, I feel like, when you start to get sort of these names, here's 3 or 4 or 5 names. It seemed like they had focused in on him for whatever reason. Now, maybe that's you got to know from Hurley. Maybe, I don't know. But this part was public. And for him to turn them down, I'm sure there'll be some spin to come out here soon, but it's gotta hurt the old ego, I feel like.
Well, the Kentucky coaching search has officially lasted longer than the Alabama football search a couple of months ago, so take that for what it is. That'll do it for today's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs. Halftime show with Terry coming up next here on the game.